Assalamu alaikum and welcome back. You have just tuned in to Women's AM, and this morning I'm joined by Sister Nasima, Sister Maliha, and we'll be joined via Skype by Arthur Iqbal a bit later on, inshallah. So, sisters, thank you for joining us today and partaking in this, this discussion and bringing with you all your knowledge of the topic. I'm sure it'll be very beneficial. Sister Nasima, I wanted to just start with you. I understand you're working in relationship therapy, so obviously, you must come across divorce quite readily. Can you tell us a little bit more about your work there?
Thank you for inviting me here. Yeah, absolutely. It's a crucial thing that we're experiencing in the Muslim community, indeed wide, across culturally. Divorce is one of the highest rate, and you would know this probably. I mean, anecdotally, I'm saying, 1 in 3 or 4 or 5 seems to be experiencing marital problems.
Wow, so that's quite a high,
quite a high number. And Muslim communities are actually quite infected by this issue as well. And it feels like a disease sort of going across through all culture and communities. And I work a lot with couple and marital conflict, including individual session with women who, even if they're not about to divorce, they're having issues within their relationship that they're struggling with.
The problem is it's a very stigmatised thing even now, isn't it? So to kind of have this support network is very crucial. And obviously, as a community worker, I'm sure you come across this a lot in your local community, and you must kind of see how it's sort of stigmatised.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a very important issue. It needs to be addressed. I mean, there is a very important arbitration process, which from my dealings with friends and family members and people that I meet, I think that's the thing that's failing us, perhaps, and that would, that would make some of the very high numbers that you're talking about. So.
Absolutely true. We'll be hearing about that a bit later on in the discussion as well. Thank you very much for sharing. Without further ado, let's go straight to her views, where today we're discussing divorce and what are the legitimate reasons to end a marriage. Divorce is called, according to one of the hadith of the Prophet, peace be upon him, the most hateful of the things that are permissible. But it is permissible, which means there are very legitimate reasons for seeking a divorce. But this understanding has to be balanced. When should we be working through our marital difficulties, and when is it best to walk away? This is a live discussion with the panel this morning, so please do call in, share your comments or questions on this topic. The number to call is on your screens now, inshallah. Sister Arfa, salam alaikum.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Welcome to the show. Jazakallah khair for joining us again this morning. Really looking forward to having this discussion. Sister Arfa, I wanted to start with the first question. As I said in the introduction, divorce is the most hated of all the halal things or the permissible things. So what reasons are there from the Sunnah to leave a marriage legitimately?
Okay, well, scholars have actually talked about lots of different reasons. So one of them is major incompatibility, especially when it comes to the deen, not being given your rights, abuse. So there's all sorts of different factors. It's not as clear-cut as what some people can see. But one thing that's really important to understand is that, especially when it comes to deen matters, Umar ibn Khattab, he actually divorced his wife on the basis that she was not a practicing Muslimah. She didn't accept the deen, so he divorced her. And even in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ's daughter Zainab was actually ordered not to go to her husband because he was a disbeliever and she was a mu'minah. And it wasn't until she actually, she said to him many times, come to Islam, and he wouldn't do that. So several years later, when he actually did accept Islam, then she was permitted to go back to him. So, religion is certainly a major factor here, but other things like major incompatibility and the other things that I have mentioned, these are all sort of valid reasons for divorce. You can't have like minor issues, like little small disagreements. They can't be reasons for divorce.
Yeah, I think divorce is such a big thing, isn't it, that you have to kind of think very, very carefully before you, take that step. I think sometimes when we're in a situation that isn't 100% pleasing to us, it's very easy to kind of get this, grass is greener mentality where you think, oh, I'll be better off on my own. Is that the reality? I think we have to think very carefully, don't we? And, Sister Arfa's kind of, conveyed some of the legitimate reasons out there for divorce. But there are also a lot of reasons that maybe, divorce isn't the best option. So, Sister Nasima, can you tell us when it might be best to try and work through our problems rather than go down the route of divorce?
Working through problems is really crucial to get the support, though. It's not something that when a couple are going through quite an intense difficulty, both perhaps emotionally highly sensitive about the issues that they're struggling with. So at that time, if they can't resolve it within themselves, they need help and support with their friends and family to do that. And if that's not possible, because there's a hadith there to go to one member from each family side to sit down with a couple and talk it through, you know, the arbitration you talked about, we have a process already shown to us how, if there is conflict, to try and address the matters. I don't think we're accessing and utilising some of that enough, because it becomes quite, you know, couples sort of don't last marriages very quickly. Either they find minor issues important or not giving each other the chance to settle into a marriage and trying things out. And so one of the things, I guess, I'm thinking mindful also the power dynamic between men have the right to divorce women very quickly, and depending on the marital contract. So, you know, fit of anger, for example, could be, you know, it's not a sufficient reason not to use that as a reason to say, you know, I'm going to divorce you because, you know, I've had enough.
Yeah.
It's something you have to think through calmly and deal with it in a cool manner, and a process involved, especially if there's kids involved as well, and their needs to be thought about. So going back to your question about, like, you know, how would make it easier going through a problem, it's accessing also professionals, and that's something crucial in the Muslim Ummah that we need to set up, where they're in the mosque. The imams give the spiritual and the religious guidance, but they're inundated and they can't cope with the emotional time that's required to process a marriage, a conflict or divorce. Even the divorce is an ending, it's a grieving process, and it requires psychotherapeutic type of approach to help the couple to end it, because otherwise the bitterness carries on, and that affects themselves, their future relationship, including, even more crucially, their children, if they have children and contact issue. And that's not usually available in the crucial time, and therefore it takes much longer for a couple to let go of that experience rather than internalising as a negative. So I've seen that in my work. You know, it takes years for either couple to let go and actually move positively forward.
I think you made a really good point, actually, that it is a kind of grieving process, and obviously it has to be treated sensitively and you know, kind of with that mindset, which I think is maybe something new to our community. We're maybe not used to kind of looking at divorce in that way. Sister Arfa, I wanted to come back to you with this question. Sister Naseem was talking a little bit about, you know, the best way to kind of work through a divorce. But what kind of reasons would you give for arriving at that decision in the first place? Maybe sort of cultural differences. Do you think this can come into reasons for divorce?
It really depends on the families. I mean, the general guidance is that if you're going to get married, you should actually seek someone who's suitable and on your level in the first place. And if that doesn't happen, say, for example, somebody's gone back home and they've gone and got married, I think that in and of itself isn't an excuse to go ahead and get a divorce, unless A, there's major incompatibility, and B, you were actually pushed into the marriage in the first place. I think that's really important to understand. And I think, you know, one thing that I've seen a lot of, especially in the Muslim community, there doesn't seem to be much patience. There's not much forbearance. So little things, you know, things that are easily fixable, but they suddenly become really big issues. And that can actually be indicative of a deeper problem within the marriage itself. Maybe they're not emotionally connected. But again, that is actually fixable. It's not something that's completely, you know, not workable at all. And I think that's very important that couples, especially when they've got children, they need to explore all options. And like the sister said, they need to access proper services in order to be able to help them to deal with that. Because sometimes in and of itself, you're not able to do that. And I don't necessarily think that families are actually best placed sometimes to take sides, because they literally do that. They will literally, you know, they'll pick on one person, especially the sister's, you know, feeling that she's being mistreated and actually she's read the situation all wrong. Maybe her husband's stressed or depressed or whatever. Her family might stick up for her and might, you know, alienate the husband, and that can actually inflame the situation further. So I would actually recommend going to a sheikh or an imam who's also a trained marriage guidance counsellor, because they can give you the religious perspective. But then failing that, you should be able to access other services, and there's absolutely no shame in it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think getting somebody who is neutral is a really good tip there. I think when we talk about divorce, you know, sometimes unfortunately we do find people that have had, you know, multiple divorces. What are the implications, or are there any implications for women that find themselves in this situation?
I think, sadly, unfortunately, there are going to be sometimes negative implications for someone who's been married, sometimes only once or twice or more.
Yeah.
There's a certain stigma attached, especially by certain pockets of the community. But what we really should understand is that divorce in itself, as we're saying, is a permissible action. So it's absolutely not for anybody to judge. Or put any kind of aspersions on the character of somebody who's had to go through these kind of unfortunate events. We don't know what's actually happening inside a marriage. We don't know the feelings that people are going through and the struggles. Rather, I think anyway that the fact that there may be a rise, as you were saying, in multiple marriages and divorces, this is actually symptomatic of something worse and something deeper. And I think actually that's a breakdown in family values. So many women, especially, even when they get married, they don't necessarily seek the advice of the mahrams within their family. You find women going to an imam or taking advice on the end of a phone line or asking their friend's husband.
Sometimes it's not, it's not what they need. It's not the best thing. We're going to come back to this in a bit, inshallah. We've had a really interesting discussion so far, but unfortunately we do have to take a quick break now. But don't go too far, because when we return, we'll be talking about how blame can manifest itself during the divorce process, and we'll be looking at examples that we can learn from within the Sunnah. Before we go, here's a quick reminder of this week's competition.
This week.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Women's AM. This morning I'm joined by sisters Nasima, Maliha and Arfa on Skype to discuss the reasons for divorce. Don't forget, if you have something to share with us on this topic, please do call in. The number is on your screen now. Sister Maliha, I wanted to come back to you quickly. I apologise very rudely, had to cut you off before the break there. But I know you wanted to make a point about, we were talking about the reasons for divorce. What is a sufficient reason? And you wanted to make a quick comment about that.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think, it's interesting how Islamic text specifically doesn't give us a set of sufficient reasons versus insufficient reasons to get divorced.
Yeah.
And what Islam does, especially for the woman, this is directly for the woman actually, is that it gives us a criteria by which the women would judge whether they should get divorced or not. And that criteria is basically this hadith narrated by Abu Dawud, radiyallahu anhu, where Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, any woman who asks her husband for a divorce for no reason, the fragrance of paradise is forbidden for her. So obviously it's very serious, but we're talking about for no reason. It's not talking about specific reasons. Women are different. For some women, what is unacceptable for others will be acceptable, as you're always discussing.
It's very subjective as well, the level of tolerance for traumatic or, also intimacy we haven't explored. If there's no chemistry and there's no intimacy and there's no compatibility, marriage is also half our deen. And therefore, it's not just a performance and procreative act, it's also spiritual. And there's pleasure also in marriage. So if there's none of that there, then really, what is the reason, as you were just saying, that we do need to be very careful about?
I think it proves, sorry if I can just, I think it proves the excellence of Islam in terms of giving rights to women, that this is not something to be scrutinised. It's not something for anyone else, a third party, to say, well, that's not a good reason. This is the woman's independent right to choice, which we say, women have the right to choose their partners and to divorce.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that you've actually made. I'm glad you've picked up on that. It is a subjective thing. It's not really for others to judge. And as you rightly pointed out as well, marriage, it is a mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it should be something that we enjoy and that we benefit from. Sister Arfa, I wanted to come back to you quickly. The sisters and I were talking about, women divorcing and the rights for divorce. But I wanted to come back to this point about multiple divorces. Do you think there are any implications for women who go through multiple divorces?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the time in the time of the Sahabas, it wasn't actually a big deal. So people would divorce, they would move on, they would get married. But for some reason, and I don't know whether that's cultural sort of stigma or whatever it is, it's a lot harder for women. If a man goes ahead and gets divorced multiple times, it's not really a big deal. He'll find himself somebody else, and it's like, oh, this is a man. But if a woman does it, now all of a sudden she's somehow used or damaged goods. She's blameworthy. There's a lot of stigma attached to her. And so finding someone else, for a sister who's gone through multiple divorces, and sometimes it can be for absolutely, no fault of her own, it's actually very unfair, to be honest with you.
Yeah, absolutely true. Absolutely true. And I agree with, what you're saying, that it obviously in the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, divorce was something that was done readily, obviously by both men and women. But I think this idea of men and women being judged differently for being in the same situation, I think we see this across society. I don't think it's specific to Muslim, the Muslim community. But I think when we look at this issue of divorce and the idea of embarking upon this, as we said, it is a big deal. It is a big issue. So, what is the advisable process for this, decision making that we're going to be doing? How do we go about that? Obviously, when we choose to marry, we have a wali, we get the families involved. So, what about the divorced? Is there any? I'll start with you, Sister Mali here. Is there any advisable process?
I think absolutely the advisable process is to first look at the Quran and Sunnah and see what we are taught to do. In Surah An-Nisa, Ayah 35, Allah Subhanahu wa Taala says, "If you fear a separation between both of them, appoint an arbitrator from his family and an arbitrator from her family. If they desire reconciliation, Allah will bring them to an agreement. Verily, Allah is all-knowing and knowledgeable." And a very interesting another narration by Ash-Shafi in his book Al-Umm is that Ubaidah as-Salami reported that a group came to Ali radiallahu an, and Ali ordered a male arbitrator from his family and from her family. Then he said to them, "Do you know what your responsibilities are? If you find you can bring them together, then do so. If you find that they should be separated, then do so." And the woman said, "I'm pleased with the book of Allah concerning what is upon me and what is for me." And the man said, "As for separation, I will not accept." So Ali radiallahu anh told him, "You're lying by Allah until you accept what she has accepted." So this just actually shows that not only are you supposed to have an arbitration process and the method of that process, but you should be conclusive. That process should actually come to an agreement. Many times when people meet, it's kind of left in the air.
Exactly.
It's just a few people met, talked about it. "Oh, I don't think he wants to listen. I don't think she's interested." It's supposed to be conclusive, and he made that very clear in the end of this example. So I think, again, that is, we're talking about an advisable process.
Absolutely,
this is the advice we follow.
Yeah, and I just want to come in there and just highlight that that process isn't working always in our communities. We're using our family members, like the walis, the representative don't want to engage. There's that conflictual relationship, or maybe they're actually the one who are fighting, and then the couple are getting caught in the middle. Yeah. So then who do you go to? So that's all something we need to think about. What else is around us outside of the family, because the blame or the personal issues get in the way. Highly emotive time sometimes, and it's very easy to make comments that could feel either party very upset and hurt.
I think actually you've touched upon a really interesting point, that this idea of blame. So how do we see this manifesting itself in the kind of divorce process? Not just between, the married couple, but sometimes it's, outside parties, sometimes it is the very people that you've called in for arbitration, in-laws, something like that.
I think blame itself is not really an Islamic principle that we call upon and adopt in any given situation. But sometimes in situations of divorce that we feel that there's somebody to blame or a situation to blame. But what we should be very careful, because it can be very detrimental. Absolutely. What blame does, obviously, is distance ourselves from having an equitable solution. It stops the doors to, discussion and dialogue. It stops us being introspective and looking at our own flaws, our own mistakes, and all
it's
of that. When we get in the whole cycle of blame, absolutely.
Yeah, and you want a good outcome, a healthy, positive outcome for all parties. Sister Afra, I wanted to come to you. We're talking a little bit about the process and what's the preferable process for divorce. So what? Have we got any examples of this from the Sunnah, and how can we see, when this has been done well, or maybe when this has been done badly?
Well, I mean, when I actually looked through the text myself, I couldn't actually find any specific examples of a bad marriage or anything like that. However,
that's telling in itself, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But I did come across, I did come across an incident where a woman, she was extremely beautiful and she was known for her beauty, and she was married to a man who was incredibly unattractive. And for some reason, even though he was a good man and he treated her really well, she actually couldn't get past that. She couldn't get past his physical appearance. So she went to the Prophet ﷺ and she complained to him, and the Prophet ﷺ, he didn't reprimand her, he didn't make her feel bad about it. He literally just annulled the marriage, and they both went their separate ways. And, they both ended up getting married again to people who they were compatible with. So it's not as clear-cut as sometimes, we think it is.
Yes.
But I do feel it's really, really important that you don't drag a marriage that is clearly completely dead for years and years and years on end. I don't think that's healthy. It's not good for the children, and it's not good for your emotional or your psychological well-being. And I think for a lot of sisters who are going through this kind of problem, they find that the first thing that's affected is actually it's their iman. Yes. And when your iman is starting to be eroded and you're disrespecting your husband for whatever reason, the lesser of the two evils is to actually get out of the marriage.
Yeah.
So
I absolutely agree.
Really
I think Sister Afra's made a really good point there about when something's over, don't let it kind of hang around to kind of mellow into a kind of bad smell. I think get it you know, get it over, get it out, and move on. We're nearly at the end of the discussion now. It's gone so quickly, subhanAllah. But Sister Nasima, very quickly, I just wanted a quick take-home message from you, or you know, piece of advice or tip.
Right. Okay. Well, I was just thinking that when you see signs of difficulties, don't ignore it.
Yep.
Don't think it'll get better next year or I'll deal with it differently. Start to find a way of accessing support, if not in the family, which can be quite difficult. But there are people out there, like myself, Muslim Marriage Council Guidance. There are lots of people now available, unlike 20 years ago.
Yeah.
There is help. But don't leave it for years before trying to get help, and then it becomes very chronic, the problems, and layers to address. It takes a long time to deal with it.
Absolutely true. It's the old saying, prevention is better than cure, isn't it? So get in early. Sister Maliha, a very quick take-home message from you.
I would say when you start facing problems, just realise that Islam actually empowers us to be proactive.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that we have to blame anyone or be fatalistic. Or what we can do by empowering ourselves is find solutions, account people, account ourselves, be introspective, come close to Allah, you know, and find a way to improve ourselves.
Absolutely.
At the end of the day, it's just a test.
Yeah.
It can be a very, very bad, serious test, but whatever it is, it's a test. And the point of the test is to improve ourselves, perhaps our marriage as well. If it's not going to last, it's out of our control. But yeah.
Jazakallah khair, thank you so much. And Sister Arfa, very quickly, have you got a take-home message?
Yeah, it's basically divorce isn't the end of the world. It's just a temporary state, and I think, you know, sometimes we have to just accept that maybe there's hikmah in that. So whatever Allah gives us, it's from His blessings, and whatever He withholds from us is actually from His hikmah, even though we don't actually see that. So the best advice that I've got for sisters who are going through this is try and accept that this is a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, make abundant dua, increase in your istighfar, and, you know, try and have as much patience and forbearance as possible. But also don't isolate yourself. It's very hard when you're going through something like this to shut yourself off from the world. It's very important to go ahead and go and access services like the sisters have actually mentioned.
Absolutely,
and, you know,
absolutely
we're living in a time where all of this is available.
Jazakallah khair, some great advice there. Being faced with a divorce is not a desirable position to be in. We would all rather be in a successful marriage than struggling through a relationship breakdown. But we must keep our faith in the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So long as our decision-making process is Islamically sound, then whatever the outcome, there will be some benefit in every situation. And remember, if you've missed any of today's show, all is not lost. You can catch the repeat tonight at 11 p.m. And the highlights from all this week will be on Sunday at 3 p.m, inshallah. And you can now watch your favourite episode of Women's AM on YouTube. Take a look at this for the details.
Did you know you can now watch some of